That sounds better.
Today we have Dr. Rebecca Sheean. Rebecca is the Director of Cure, Research and Programs at Fight MND. I met Bec, as she prefers to be known, over 2 years ago when I flung myself in uninvited to the Fight MND community. Bec's a little nervous about being here today, which I don't understand because she's always in front of a camera somewhere, spreading the word of Fight, and what an amazing job they do. Bec, hi.
Hi, Jane. How are you?
I am stunningly well. Thank you, Bec.
That's good. It's very funny, Jane. I always think back to the first time that I met you. And first thing I noticed, of course, you're such a stylish lady. And I was like,
thanks.
oh, who's this stylish lady? And the second thing was that you said, I like to make people cry. And that you did.
I do. And I'm good at it, and I'll continue to do it. But I make myself cry too, which some days hurts a little bit.
Yeah.
So, Bec.
But you're so great. Yeah, I know that part of this podcast is telling everybody else's stories, but you're so great at sharing your experience. And I think people really connect with that because you are really honest about how your experience was. So, we're so grateful to have you.
Thank you, darling.
Speaking out.
Well, it's very important that people feel the feels.
All the feels.
Bec, tell us a little bit about you.
A bit about me. So I grew up in Melbourne with my family. I have an older sister, Rachel, and a younger brother, Nick. And my mum and dad, we grew up in sort of Bulleen area, and most of my family's kind of around the Montmorency area now. So I grew up, went to university after school, had a real interest in science and absolutely love sport. So from 5 years of age, I've played basketball, which is awesome. I absolutely love sport. And so still playing it now, even though I'll just say I've been playing it for more than 30 years and we'll leave it at that.
So you're around 35.
and some, but we'll just leave it at that.
Bec, do you have dogs?
I do have dogs, and I can hear your
Sorry about that.
Little cheeky monkeys in the background. So Jane, obviously you and I bonded over our love of dogs. So I also have 2 dogs. I have a beautiful border collie called Ruth. She's named after Ruth Bader Ginsburg because she's a very smart, lovely little lady. And a new rescue puppy that my partner Grange and I got recently. We've had him for about 2 months. So he's a red cattle dog, or a red heeler, and he's a big buffhead and a little heartbreaker. So his name is Romeo.
And they're getting on okay now. I'm going to yell. Hang on a minute. Lily, stop it. Workman out the front. She can't cope. And they're getting on okay, those 2?
Yeah, they're getting on okay now. I think Ruth was not impressed in the beginning, but
Ruth has been an only child for a long time. So.
Yes, but they're starting to warm up to each other. He's starting to learn some manners, which is good.
Beautiful. Bec, when you left school and when you went to uni, what did you originally study?
So growing up, I always wanted to be a vet. I had a big passion and love for animals. So I studied animal science in my undergrad, so majoring in zoology. So lots of outdoorsy type work, but still with a science background. And I absolutely loved that. And after I finished my honours year at uni, I actually moved to regional New South Wales, so to Orange. And so shout out to my amazing Uncle Phil, who let me go and stay with him and live in Orange
Uncle
for a while.
Phil?
Yeah, legend.
Yeah, legend.
And that was a great experience. I think also not just having grown up in Melbourne and then moving to a regional town was a really interesting experience. But I got to spend my days out on the water, looking at, we used to trap migrating birds to look at different strains of avian influenza. And I just loved being outdoors every day. And then, sort of going back afterwards to do the research side of things. So it was really fun. But during my summer holidays, I actually did a sort of summer placement at the Florey Neuroscience Institute, or the Howard Florey Institute as it was back then. with a researcher there, and we were doing some work on modeling stroke in the lab. And I just found that really fascinating, that you could model disease and study it as a way to learn about how to treat it. And that's where my sort of interest in neuroscience began.
Quite frankly, when I walk into the Florey, I wish I was a scientist.
Yeah, it's
I just want to do sciencey things. It's amazing.
yeah,
you talk, I'm closing the door. Hang on.
I think that's okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think being a scientist, actually being in the lab and doing experiments, I absolutely loved it. It's fantastic. You can, design an experiment to answer a question. I would say if you like cooking, you'll probably like science, because you're kind of cooking with, just not with delicious ingredients. It's mixing this and mixing that and heating things up and spinning things around. So yeah, it's really good fun. It's one of the most challenging but most rewarding jobs, I think.
And then the switch across from zoology to being interested in MND.
Yeah, so I think doing that summer internship and getting that sort of taste for medical research made me really interested in moving into that field. But I think what got me into MND was really just reading about a project that had come up. They were looking for a PhD student to take on this project. It just sounded really fascinating, and it was on a disease that I'd never heard of before. So it was on amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, or MND. I'd never heard of it before. There was so little known about it, so much unknown, so much to be discovered. And so I found, from a scientist perspective, I found that really exciting to be involved in an area where so little was known about the disease. So that's how I came to work in the neuropharmacology lab at the Florey to do my PhD.
And how long were you there for?
I was there in that lab. It took me about 4.5 years to finish my PhD. Wow. So a long time. And then during my PhD, I also started to look at opportunities to continue on afterwards. So I then went from my neuropharmacology lab into an MND specific lab at the Florey, and I worked with Professor Brad Turner, who many people will know of. He's a fantastic MND researcher based here in Melbourne.
He's a bit of a rock star, frankly.
Yeah, he's got an absolute brilliant mind. I always think he has a photographic memory. I think he remembers every single figure in every single paper he's ever read. And he's got such an amazing knowledge of the field, of all the research that's happened in the past, but also really great vision and ideas for the future as well.
Yeah, his lab there just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's really funny though, because when I worked with Brad, that was back in 2012, I started working with him, and we had 3 people in our lab, so Brad and myself and a student. And we were, every year just really battling to get enough funding to work on this disease that, wasn't very common. There wasn't a lot of awareness about it. And then I think in 2014, the Ice Bucket Challenge happened. And obviously the awareness of the disease was enormous, and the amount of funding that was raised was just incredible to see. And then off the back of that, of course, Fight MND was formed. And we were just seeing this enormous awareness about the disease. I remember being in the lab, having my phone on me, refreshing the tally of the first big freeze, and just seeing the numbers go up and up, and just being absolutely blown away at the potential to have an impact in research through those sorts of funds that were being raised.
So then Fight MND, obviously, or not obviously, for those in Victoria, but for around the rest of the country and the world, is when Neil Danaher, who's a very famous footballer and coach in Australia, was diagnosed with MND, which is coming up, we're at the 10-year anniversary of that. So he and whom else decided to start Fight MND?
Yeah, so it was really the 3 amigos. There was Neil Danaher, who's living with MND, and Pat Cunningham, who lost his beautiful wife Angie to MND, and an incredible man called Dr. Ian Davis, who died from MND back in 2018. And it was actually Ian that I met one day who had me interested in joining the foundation. So I met Ian back in the lab one day. It's funny, I always look back and think about when the first day that I met people and that first impression. And he just was incredibly tall. He would have been a much better basketballer than me, probably. I think he's about 6'4".
He didn't have the passion for basketball, Bec.
No, but he was just an absolutely brilliant mind. So Ian was a medical doctor. He'd finished studying. He was working on cancer when he was diagnosed, and started the foundation, and then joined forces with Pat and Neil. So I met Ian when he came to visit our lab to hear about some of the research we were doing. And I was really funny in the early days. I did myself a bit of fundraising for Fight MND, and was shocked when I sort of sent an inquiry through that it was actually Ian that was replying to all the inquiries.
God love him.
Yeah, he just did everything to help set up the organization. So then I remember a couple of years later just absolutely loving seeing what the foundation was doing. And, you know, they really were starting to fuel that MND research workforce. So it was pretty cool to see. But I think the biggest thing for me was that as much as I loved working in the lab, I'd started to really enjoy the experience of meeting the families and people with MND and talking to them about the research. So I could just see there was such an enormous gap between how researchers talk about research and, you know, what an everyday person, especially someone who's going through that traumatic event of trying to learn what they can about this disease. And so I wanted to really think about how we could bridge that gap. And that's when I started to think more about moving out from a lab-based research job and looking more at working in either more of a clinical space, but also looking for like a sort of science communication type role where I could find a way to talk about research that was going to be accessible to everybody.
Well, you do that very well. It's in the MND community, we hear lots of big words. And when you're stuck
lots of acronyms as well.
Oh, Lord.
Scientists are terrible. They're the worst.
They really are. So this is an acronym-free zone here. But when you're stuck in that mire of panic and sheer terror, and people talk to you in really big words and acronyms, it blows your mind. You don't do that. You bring it down to something that we can all understand.
It's probably helped me understand as well, Jane.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But really, I think there's so much information out there. And I think we're always really hopeful when we do research, but scientists are the most cautious people, I think, when it comes to talking about research outcomes.
Good.
You know, it might even be wording around, you know, it appears that there may be an increase rather than just saying this increases this. Unless you can definitively show that, scientists are usually pretty cautious about how they say things. So the last thing that you would ever want to do with your research is give people false hope, but we want to give them the real hope.
And that's something that in our group that I'll talk to you about in a sec, I think we were discussing last time, is that we've been seeing more and more regularly on television. I feel that we're being given false hope that a new drug has come on the market and it's going to make an amazing difference and blah, blah, blah. And that's cruel to do to the MND community, because often they can just be phase 1 trials, you know.
Exactly.
Just that's not going to help anybody.
Study. Yeah. And I can understand as a company, you know, if you want to move your drug along, you have to get funding to do that. And it's, you know, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you don't have interest in it, then that's not going to be possible. So I think it's kind of our role as well to educate the MND community that, you know, when we hear what we hear, is it a phase 1 study? Is it a safety study? What does that mean? And it's great to be excited about it. It's great when anything goes into trial for MND. But, you know, we need to sort of, you know, understand what that really means and understand, you know, how much further it still has to go.
Yeah, which can be a long way.
And I have I was going to tell you the funny story about how I came to join Fight
Oh,
MND.
good. Yep.
So this is quite a funny story. So I was thinking about this kind of working more with in clinical research, working more with people with MND. I was also thinking about this science communication type role, and I was having a meeting with my boss, Brad Turner, at the time, and he said, "Oh, I've just heard about this new role at going at Fight MND for a research coordinator. They're looking for someone, you know, with a PhD, but someone who's, you know, quite kind of chatty and outgoing, and someone who would like to talk about where the research funding is going and to manage their research grant program." He's like, "Do you know anyone who might be interested?"
Oh, no.
And I was thinking, yes, I do, actually.
Soz, Brad.
Yeah, so I sort of emailed Ian on the
On the
slide.
sly.
Yeah, and just said, "Tell me a bit more." And then we had a few discussions about the role. And after I accepted the role, I remember being in a room with Brad and Ian, and he said to Brad, "Have you forgiven me yet?" And Brad just stayed quiet. So, but I think he's moved on now.
I'll ask him. Yeah. Are you still full of resentment with Bec?
He's probably grateful I've moved on now.
You told me the story once when I think we were wandering around in Canberra, the effect that Ian's death had on you, and it was profound. It's very difficult. One of the very difficult things working in this or volunteering in this field is that we become very close to people and then we lose them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I worked with Ian when I first joined the foundation. I mean, I've worked with Ian every single day. When I first joined the foundation, he was already in a wheelchair, so he didn't come into the office every day, but he came in as much as possible. And he was just so passionate and driven. You know, he was working 24/7. And that in itself is hard when you're sort of working your normal job and the other person is working 24/7. And so, you know, you feel like you don't want to let them down and you want to have that same level of commitment. So I think especially in the early years, it was, you know, it was all consuming, I think, the role of trying to get things off the ground. And I think a little bit the weight too of carrying, you know, if I was going to an international conference and Ian couldn't be there, that making sure that I was doing the best job I could to represent him and his voice. But it was incredible to see the change in having that purpose and you know, that those, and I see it in Neil as well, that having that purpose to help other people living with the disease really drives you forward. And so in the early days with Ian, it was really, really awesome. And then I think as his disease started to progress, it became really hard. You know, I absolutely loved working with him. But, you know, he was really down sometimes, and, you know, we was talking every day, and it was really hard to see my friend and my colleague going through that. And yeah, I think towards the end, when he had sort of made the decision that he was ready to die, you know, selfishly you wanted him to hang around it and be there, but you know, understanding his decision and his choice. And I think even though I knew the day that, you know, we said our goodbyes, and I knew the next day that it was going to happen, it was still just an absolute shock. And I think one of the hardest things too was that after he was gone, within the foundation, you know, I had to keep we had to keep the show on the road. Yeah, exactly. So I think I still have that that loss of him all the time, when you think, oh, I just wish I could ask him what to do in this situation, or I wish I could see just how much impact he's had in what he's done. And I love when I get to sort of connect with, like, update his mum. We went over to Adelaide a couple of years ago when they opened the MND biomarker facility in his honour, and then seeing his little boy Archie as well. You know, seeing that legacy of what he's really built is incredible.
You would have made him extremely proud. Extremely proud now. Yeah.
I hope so. I always
Oh,
tell everybody this story when I first started working at the foundation. He'd say, "What do you think about this?" And I'd say, "Oh, well, I think it's really good because of X, Y, and Z." And then I'd say, "But, it could be bad because blah, blah, blah." And he said, "I don't know how you sit down. You must have splinters in your bum all the time." And I was like, "What are you
because
talking
you're
about?"
on the fence. Yeah.
He said, "You're sitting on the fence." And he said, back yourself, make a decision. And I think that I hear that little voice saying that to me when I'm weighing things up, of being like, okay, now what does your gut tell you? And
Gut.
then push
Yeah.
on with it. Yeah. And yeah, I think it is really, you have to back yourself sometimes. And one of the things that I think is really evident of that is I know, Jane, obviously you're really aware of it. I'm not sure how much the rest of the MND community is, but around the MND Research Collective.
Well, that was my next question, Bec. So thanks for jumping in. When we spoke with Gethin Thomas from MND, we were talking about it, and he said, "No, it's Bec's idea. It's hers." So, explain to everybody what is the MND research community, and how did you have that epiphany?
So I guess the original idea to have a sort of collaborative effort was something that I felt really strongly about. We're all working on the same thing, but is there a way we could work on it together and be more efficient or more effective or more strategic in the way that we're doing that? But the collective itself was certainly not my idea. It was a really co-designed idea through a whole bunch of people from within the MND research community, including researchers and amazing neurologists like Susan Mathers, and some amazing people living with the disease, including Murray Gill, who's died from MND, but was such a critical part of that initial early stages of forming the collective. So really the collective is about bringing people together. We're all trying to solve this problem together, but how can we do it together and work efficiently and effectively? And obviously joining with Gethin was really important, because as the two major funders of MND research in Australia, we need to be working together and not against each other. And as funders too, you can kind of help drive researchers to work together as well, by reinforcing ideas around, if you want funding for your research, you need to share ideas and work together. And I think we're lucky in MND compared to some other research communities that people are really collaborative and open to working together. So yeah.
I agree. And there are 3 different groups that come under the umbrella. What are they?
So within the collective, we have our most important group, which is our lived experience group. So our MND, we call it our MND Plex group. So our people with lived experience. So that can be people with MND or people who've cared for someone or lost someone to MND. They're part of that group, which obviously Jane is the chair of, an amazing chair of, as well as Phil Camden as well. And then we have our clinical care group, which is researchers or clinicians who work in the MND space. That could be people from allied health, so OTs, physios, people who work in palliative care, neurologists, and they're people who work more in the clinical care space. So the type of research that you do when you go into your MND clinic to see your clinicians. And then we have our discovery research group, which is our lab-based researchers. So we have people who work on cell models of the disease, or people who work on genetics or proteins or any of those different types of lab-based technologies. So we have those 3 distinct groups, but importantly, people from each group sit across all 3 groups so that we can make sure that people are collaborating where possible and people are across what everybody's doing. And then we have representatives from each of those groups, which form a board. And that's also includes extra people with lived experience, and Gethin and myself, who also sit on that board. And we help to shape up some of the strategic objectives of the collective more broadly.
I'm lucky enough to sit on that board, and I love it because it is so collaborative, but also I love it because we are not shy, and that there are often some quite, what's the word I would use? Rambunctious discussions. And I love that people, everyone who's in there is totally committed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think everyone has the important thing with any sort of collective is that you bring your own expertise and you don't have a whole bunch of people with the same expertise, because then you end up with a narrow direction or a narrow solution that only helps a narrow group of people. So I think we're so lucky with the collective that we have a great bunch of people who feel like they can speak up and share their own experience.
And I know you don't know about this, but it's coming. We've in the Plex group, there's some research that we would like done now, so that's going to pop into the next meeting, and that's lovely that it can come, and this is the whole aim of it. But our group have been saying to me, hang on, we need researchers to research this, and we can actually actively do something about that. And that's exciting, because often people with MND or lived experience just kind of have to sit in the background and wait.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's so exciting to see as an idea that I first had many years ago, probably four or so years ago. And, I sort of put the idea out there, and it was, not super supported. People weren't really, what's the word? They didn't really believe that we could get people to work together. But
you have it, and it's remarkable.
Yeah, and I think seeing the things that are coming out of the MND Research Collective, having that lived experience voice throughout all the research that we're talking about. And I mean, even this podcast is amazing. It's creating a community and educating people, but not from big scientists standing out the front yelling acronyms at you. It's people who've been in the space, or the peers talking about what research actually means, and how research can help people living with MND too.
And I actually had the idea that our first collective meeting, when we're all sitting there at the hospital, I was just sitting there thinking, oh my God, we could do this because we have access to all of these amazing people.
Yeah. And we have an amazing host. So what more could you want?
Okay, now it is year 10, big freeze. So it's a very big year this year.
It is. It's a huge year. It's very exciting. So our campaign is only a couple of weeks away from launching, which is exciting. We want this year to be bigger and better than ever. And I think part of what we're trying to do this year is look back at, what it was like 10 years ago, and just how far the Australian community and the MND research community has come in that short amount of time. And I think just wanting to acknowledge that, Fight MND obviously invests in the research, but it's not us really doing it. It's all of the people who go out and buy a beanie and donate that are helping to fuel this. And, I talked about earlier and Brad, when I was in the lab with Brad and our one student, and, research labs across Australia now have gone from a couple of members struggling for funding to teams of 20 or 30 people working together on the disease. There's been some really great critical infrastructure that's been supported. And probably one of the most important things is that people who are diagnosed with MND in Australia can now participate in clinical trials, which just wasn't available before. And the biggest change I've seen is that in my first year at FIDE, I'd been at the organisation for about 5 weeks, and I went to the International Symposium, which was in Dublin, and I had a meeting with a drug company, which Ian had organised, and I went along with a couple of the top MND neurologists, and we sort of pitched, that we had $10 million to get them to bring their trial to Australia. And the response was, why would we come to Australia? It's in the middle of nowhere. And now I know it was quite shocking. Or I didn't know they did M&D research down under, there's kind of that kind of attitude. And now Australia is recognised as a really central hub for M&D research. And my team get emails, regularly from drug companies saying, hey, we would love to come to Australia and use your research networks and your amazing clinical clinicians and your amazing cohort of patients to be involved in our trial. So now we're sort of having to be selective around who we want to come here.
Hope that Dublin company doesn't get in touch.
Yeah.
No.
Yes, it was an interesting meeting, but I think it's great to see how far the research community has come. And and we never want to give the message, hey, it's been 10 years, we've committed close to $100 million into the M&D research space, but we certainly still have a long way to go. So it is year 10, but it's not the year 10 with a bow in it. It's
not. It's year 10 and let's continue. But I think the difference and I'm coming to the Loom thing, and I know that you're going to cry the whole night when you're looking back at all those photos. But I think the thing is, in the MND community, we all need hope. And Fight MND gives us hope.
I absolutely agree with that. And certainly for people with MND, but as a researcher, also for researchers as well, because they can think differently about the way they do research. And so they can, have big ideas or, think outside the box rather than just trying to, do what I always called grant-based research, which is doing the experiments to help write your next grant so that you can get funding. You can do things that are a little bit out there and much more focused on having impact for patients.
Yeah, rather than wondering where your next penny is coming from.
Exactly, yeah.
My love, I've kept you for a long time now.
I feel like that was so fast.
It's because you're so interesting.
I could talk to you all day, Jane.
We have been known to do that. Now, is there anything you would specifically like to say to the MND community?
I would just like to say a huge thank you to the MND community for supporting us and helping us do what we do. A lot of our big fundraising efforts come from communities getting behind those people who are diagnosed or who've lost someone to MND. But, it's not just about raising the funds too, it's about raising awareness. And, as well as anyone, Jane, that when you're going through that, it's heartbreaking. And so for people to come out and tell their stories and share their experience, just so grateful to have access to the reality of what it's really like for the people and the families, and even for people like you, Jane, who've lost someone, to keep telling that story, because I think it would be really easy to want to shut that part of your life off and not think about it because it's painful. But so grateful that people are open to sharing that. And then from the M&D collective perspective and research perspective, it's just that interest and passion in research and willingness to be involved, especially for people who are living with the disease, who spend their time coming into the clinic or, giving a blood sample or giving a skin sample, so that researchers can do the research and knowing that it's probably going to help people in the future.
Everybody with whom I speak all know that the research that's being done now is not going to help them, but everybody says, I want to help the next generation. And, it makes me cry every time I think about it, because it's so selfless and it's so giving and it's so loving. I met a guy the other day, actually, he was a plumber here, and he had a big Freeze 9 beanie on. And I said to him, if ever I see anyone in a beanie, I say, why are you wearing that? I said, why are you wearing that? And he said, well, I barrack for Richmond, but I bloody love Neil Danaher.
Yeah.
And I said, do you have anyone in your community who's had MND? And he said, yes, someone from the footy club. So he said, we raise money every year. And, it's that pocket of, I had to come inside so he didn't see me cry. But that is replicated over and over and over and over and over and over again. And, we can't express our gratitude enough to those people that do that. It may be $500 or $250. That makes a massive difference to us. It's huge.
Yeah, it's incredible. And people just go above and beyond it. It blows me away. And, it can be anything from someone who I went to an amazing fundraiser last year in Bairnsdale, which did a DIY Big Freeze. So they built their own slide and they had local celebrities get dressed up. It was amazing to see that community. But then I also met a little boy a couple of years ago who was his mum was telling me he was a very shy little boy, but he saw a video of Neil talking about, your actions speak louder than words, and it's what you say and not what you do. And he was really inspired by that.
Hang on, it's what you do, not what you say.
Yeah, it's what you do. Sorry, thanks. I need to get that one.
You're not the sharpest tool in the shed, Bec.
As my friends say, I'm the silliest smart person they know. But this little boy was so inspired by this video that he wrote a little poster, and then he went door to door in his street with his mum, and told them about the video, showed them the video of Neil, and raised I think he raised $80 for us.
Stop.
Oh, it was just beautiful. And you think, so it's just incredible the things that people will do to support, whether it's someone they know or even someone they don't know.
Did you tell Neil that story?
Absolutely. Neil sent him a thank you video. Yeah, it was just so
my
cute.
God. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to cry again. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Jane, it was my absolute pleasure. I hope that this is a good podcast. I absolutely love your podcast.
A very good podcast. Thanks, darling.
I love listening to it. I listen to it all the time. I laugh, I cry with you. So thank you so much for what you do. Not just the podcast, but everything that you do.
It's an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. All right, my love, have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
And as we're coming up to Big Freeze, we'll be seeing each other a lot.
Yes, we will. And I need to hear some more about your Antarctic trip.
I will tell you all about it.
Excellent.
All right.
Well, have a great day.
Thanks, sweetheart. Bye. Bye.